And I joined.
Yeah. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. We've got some people in the room, some people online, so welcome. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Andrew Schwartz, Executive Director of the Center for Process Studies, and it is my pleasure to introduce our first, I think this might be the first CPS student seminar in the new series that we're developing of our PhD student, Bradford McCall, who's studying process theology here at CST. Bradford has an impressive 3 previous master's degrees, so clearly well-informed and loves school, and we're doing work especially on theology and science, and as a doctoral student, actually published more in the last few years than most professors I know, having come out with 2 books, one in 2017 called A Modern Relation of Theology and Science, Assisted by Emergence and Kenosis. I think we'll probably hear some similar themes coming out in today's lecture. And then his most recent, God and Gravity, a Philip Clayton reader on science and theology. So it is one of my great pleasure to welcome Bradford McCall.
In a not so funny way, we are all prisoners of love. The prompt to which I'm responding to in this lecture today is related to whether or not God is necessarily loving or freely loving. In answering this question, I'm going to be dialoguing with Thomas J. Ord a great deal, who is the theological giant when it comes to the Christian exposition of love. Having written in the past decade, for example, Defining Love in 2010, Defining Love 2010, The Nature of Love 2010, The Uncontrolling Love of God 2015, and then also God Can't in 2019, his most recent book, God Can't, How to Believe in God and Love After Abuse, Tragedy, and Other Evils. Great read. If you want to get into the corpus of Thomas J. Ord, start from the last book and work backwards. Indeed. Start from the last one and work backwards. This is probably note there. Further, I shall reiterate a minority viewpoint on the meaning and extrapolation of the term kenosis in the Greek language. That is, that the term refers variously to a self-giving, a self-donation, a self-bestowal, or even a self-offering. By coining the phrase canonically donated in this lecture today, I'm referring to the methodology by which the Spirit's self-giving, self-offering, creative, and uncontrolling love imbibes creation with itself. Thereafter, the created world is ever docile before the Spirit, and therefore ever open to the causal inclinations of the Spirit, causal influence of the Spirit. Indeed, the Spirit of God in Spirit is formless in chaotic matter, and nothing, quote unquote, thereby becomes something. That is, as a result of this breath of God imparted, nature eventually gives birth to life after a long period of time of gestation. At the onset of this lecture, I'd like to make a comment here quickly. That being, I'd like to stipulate that the utmost form of love is the utmost gift of self. The utmost form of love is the utmost gift of self. The same is true for people as well as for God. The utmost gift of love is the utmost gift of self. So then, to the extent that we give ourselves to another, to that same extent do we love another person, another entity, or whatever you might want to refer to it as. The same is true for God, I contend. I will indeed argue in the lecture that follows for a notion of love that is necessarily canonically donated, self-giving, creative, and uncontrollable. Indeed, in so doing, I will aim at substantiating that this necessary, canonically donated, self-giving, creative, and uncontrolling love is necessarily an empowerment of the other, whatever the other might be, other entity, other person, other animal, etc., of the other. I will further argue that God both calls and expects his creation, his creatures, to exhibit full ordered love. You should pick up on the fact that I'm using Ord's name there, Thomas J. Ord. I'm conjugating his name into orbit in order to make it more explicit and have a moniker that's memorable. At the onset of this lecture, I've already done that part. More specifically, the canonically denoted foreordered love that is herein argued for onsets an evolving fertility in the world today, largely caused by the panentheistic relationship between God and the world that becomes a reality but due to the kenosis of the Spirit to creation. This panentheistic orientation is principally pneumatologically derived, that is Spirit-caused, Spirit-based, and is established by the imbibification of matter by the Spirit of God. Imbibification is a word that I've coined recently in order to refer to the methodology by which the Spirit imbibes matter. I'm using the term imbibe there in the Old English sense, of the 13th, 14th century Old English, in the sense of being a thorough imbibification and a saturation, a permeation, or an inundation, etc. This panentheistic orientation is principally pneumatologically derived, as I said earlier, which thereafter causes the Spirit to be embedded within nature and also embodied within nature. Embedded and embodied. Imbibification then refers to the process by which some entity, something, or someone is imbibed by the Spirit of God. So then, the Spirit conveniently offers herself, giving genuine freedom and thus genuine power to that which is created. It may be deduced then that the Spirit created a type of world in which she's not the only agent. I'm using the feminine there for the Spirit because in the Bible, consistently throughout the Bible, you'll find that the feminine pronoun is used with regard to the Spirit in order to somewhat balance the God the Father and God the Son. I think God the Spirit was quite palatable. Anyway, so then the Spirit enables and ennobles creation to be itself by conferring freedom as well as authentic causal powers unto the creation of the natural world. Rather than bringing about a ready-made world, a cookie-cutter world, so to speak, the Spirit works with nature in order to bring about complexity. The Godhead allows nature, canonically empowered by the Spirit, to develop according to its own pace through the imbibification of the Spirit into creation. It's hot in here, excuse me. It's warm. In fact, the Godhead allows creation to develop according to its own pace through macroevolution. This evolving fertility is not linear in progression, Instead, it's rather staggered, because the Spirit is not the manipulator of creation, but the director or the composer instead. I like the idea there of composition, of having an orchestra, with a man just waving the baton, I guess directing the orchestra. That's what the Spirit does with creation. She's the director of creation. Thereafter, marked by the spirit of contingency within macroevolution, the natural world progressed in a serpentine manner into the advancement of greater complexity, of which Homo sapiens sapiens, that's our particular subspecies, of which we are the pinnacle, at least right now anyway. But what that bodes for future evolution, we know not, because I have a sneaking suspicion that God is not finished with the world yet. And even though we're doom and gloom with all the climate change, what have you, I still contend that God is omnipotent and He can work around things if He needs to. Nevertheless, just as God usually works within creation, and rather within human affairs, and not around human affairs, but works within them instead, so too do I contend that God works within creation. Within creation. So then it may be deduced that the Spirit created a type of world in which she's not the only agent. Indeed, the Spirit creates entities that are truly other than herself. And part of this otherness is agency. So that which is created has agency. That which is created has agency. That means then that the Spirit enables and ennobles creation to be itself by conferring freedom as well as authentic causal powers to the natural and material world. This evolving fertility is not a linear progression, as I said earlier, but it's staggered because the Spirit is not the manipulator of creation, but the director instead. Just as God usually works within normal course of human affairs, I said that, the Spirit works modestly in a continuous fashion in and through natural processes. Indeed, as the Spirit is the source of creative evolution, the Spirit works from within creation to generate ever-increasing complexity. This implies, therefore, that what may be referred to as natural processes, or what even may be referred to as random processes, are in fact God-caused, Spirit-derived causation. This implies, therefore, that the indirect acts of the Spirit are actually secondary causes. This apparent secondary causation in creation is due to the fact that the Spirit is the agent of discovery amongst the various possibilities of God. In this secondary capacity, the Spirit is the remote cause, whereas most approximately the natural course of affairs in the world are the proximate cause. Part 2, kenotic love as self-donation and self-giving. I did not originate the terminology of self-donation, of love as self-donation. Pope John Paul II did. I also did not originate the terminology of uncontrolling love. Tom Moore did, who's probably listening to us now. However, I'm going to co-opt both love as self-donation and also uncontrolling love in the lecture that I'm giving you today, at least their application, in what I have referred to various times before as canonically donated love. Canonically donated love. This depiction of mine is based fundamentally upon the notion that kenosis amounts to a self-giving. Kenosis is not a mere self-abnegation. Like oftentimes when we think of kenosis, we think of the kenotic hymn in Philippians 2, 5 through 11, where of course it makes mention to the fact that God the Son, Jesus, self-emptied him, or emptied himself of his divinity and became man, etc. Well, that's one understanding of kenosis. That's not the full gamut of meaning within kenosis. Kenosis also refers to, for example, Rebecca pouring out the water into the animal trough in Genesis 24, verse 40 thereabout. Regardless, the water in the trough got full, but the pitcher got emptied. Do you see that correlation there? The pitcher was empty, but the trough was made full. Similarly, I contend when God the Spirit goes to the kenotic act of donation, self-donation, similarly, she may become empty, but the surrounding matter, if you will, the physical world becomes full of God. This all says, of course, a pantheistic relationship between God and the world. The concepts of self-donating and uncontrolling love to and for creation are highly illustrative, essentially equivalent metaphors with which to picture the Spirit's dynamic presence on earth within our late modern context. In noting that the love of God, of the Spirit rather, is canonically donated, I mean to draw attention to the idea that she not only gives love itself, but also herself in the act of giving. Again, let me repeat that. In noting that the love of the Spirit is canonically donated, I intend to portray the idea that she not only gives love itself, but also herself in the act of love. Hence, I say that the Spirit's love is canonically donated. Picking up Ward's illustration of uncontrolling love, by which he means that God gives out of God's fullness, but does not insist upon controlling the response of creatures to that love given, to that love imparted, hence uncontrolling love. I assert that the Spirit particularly gives out of God's fullness, but does not insist on controlling the responses of creation due to the impartation of that love. In fact, I'm going to say even more boldly so. The Spirit cannot control other entities. God cannot control other entities. The Spirit cannot control other entities. Note that I did not say will not. I said cannot. That's very, I guess, specific, and it's also intentional. God, the Spirit, cannot control other entities. The Spirit cannot insist on having control, and that necessarily so. A concurrence of wills is required, rather, for God to realize his or her intentions in the world today. A concurrence of wills is required for God to realize his or her intention in the world today. Concurrence of wills. This is the position everywhere intimated by Thomas J. Ward, but made most pronouncedly so in his latest book, God Can't, that I highlighted earlier. How to believe in God after tragedy, abuse, and other evils. In this understanding, the Spirit respects the autonomy and the integrity of creation. and of creatures within creation. In fact, due to her nature being primarily canonically donated to love, the Spirit cannot control the entities at all, be they animate or not. Although she could, and in fact does, lure, woo, beckon, and bid entities to come nigh unto her toward the eschaton. This is a sort of prolepsis, which terminology may not be familiar to all of us here today. Prolepsis is the idea that the future of God, the eschatological reality of God, the end of time, the eschatology, the end of times, is inbreaking on the present, inbreaking on the present. So the eschatological reality of God, that which will be reality at the end of time, is inbreaking upon us even today, proleptically. Creation is seen then in this proleptic viewpoint as an unfinished, redemptive process that will be consummated in the eschatological future of God, which lures the created world toward itself, toward higher complexity. A deeper explication of full ordered love, part 3. Ord contends that just as creaturely love sometimes takes the form of agape, eros, philia, and storge love, so too does God's love at times take the demonstration of philia, eros, agape, and and storge love. In agape love, God intentionally responds to ill-being by promoting overall well-being. That is, God repays evil with good in agape love. In contrast, in displaying eros love, God appreciates the value and seeks to increase the value in other entities. He sees the value, and then he also seeks to increase it as well, enhance that value. Notably, Ord defines filial love as acting intentionally to promote overall well-being by establishing deeper levels of cooperation in the world today. Cooperative friendship, actually. Filial love, then, I do claim, is the love of co-laborment. Co-laborment. That's a compound word that I put together there that seems to be pretty self-evidentiary. Co-laborment. Indeed, God expresses filial love by working cooperatively with entities, and also by aiding creatures to work cooperatively with other creatures to increase the common good. Understand what I mean by that? Filial love is a form of love that works alongside of God and others in order to promote overall well-being. What's more, it is my contention that God's love is full-ordered, that is, composed of agape, eros, philia, and storge dimensions, and also that it is incumbent upon us humans to display full-ordered love in all our interactions toward other entities. The notion that God's love is full-ordered presupposes that God is a thoroughly relational being. And as relational, God both affects and is affected by other entities. God affects and is affected by other entities. That's a pretty alarming statement for most traditional theologians, to claim that God is affected by his creation. Because it seems as though in the traditional understanding that if God were to be affected by his creation, he would not be perfect because he would change. Well, necessarily so, do we relational theologians claim that God changes in response to the activities of his creation? Relational theologians do affirm that, indeed they do. The notion that in a highly positive development of the last generation or so, relational theologians have rejected the idea that God is an aloof monarch. Sitting on his throne with the scepter in his right hand, and with the white Jesus on the right hand of God, etc. We rejected that entirely. We contend that God is more relational in his orientation. God, in fact, suffers in, with, and under all things. In, with, and under all things. That's coming from Peacock, there, Arthur Peacock. God is, in fact, the most moved mover. The most moved mover. What I mean by the most moved mover is the idea that God is constantly growing and evolving in creativity, agency, and innovation, along with the world in the ongoing evolutionary epoch. Although creatures truly affect this truly relational God, God's eternal nature of love is unchanging. Notice the step that I just took there. Although I earlier affirmed the idea that creation affects God, I didn't just claim that God's eternal nature is unchanging. That's because we have to somehow, in order to do justice with the biblical data, we've got to posit a polarity in God, some sort of polarity in God. And we process theologians posit that God has a primordial nature that is unchanging. That's his eternal nature of love that's unchanging, that's steadfast, that's fixed, and it's inexorably the same from day to day, year to year, etc., millennia to millennia. Although we process theologians also posit at the same time that God has a consequent nature that is dependent upon the activity of his creation and the responses of his creation to his overtures of love and so forth, his overtures of divine action and so forth of that nature. Again, so we must assert there's a polarity in God. While God's eternal primordial nature is fixed and then inexorably the same, his consequent nature changes freely in response to his creatures. The primordial nature remains the same, but the consequent nature changes because it's dependent upon the decisions of non-divine actual entities. So then, that God loves remains the same, but how God loves changes with the particular circumstance at hand. That God loves is reference to his essential nature, and that nature never alters. The responses of creaturely entities, however, influence the particular way that God loves others in any given environment, any given situation, any environment. Part 4, God's love for the other. Ord claims that God necessarily loves the other. To invoke Boltzmannian language, Rudolf Bultmann, the other. Because God's uncontrolling loving actions rather, are expressions of his divine nature, love requires relationships with other entities. Thus, if love is an essential divine property, and love always requires relations, then ipso facto, we should conclude that God at all times has relationships with other entities. This has direct implication to the eternality of the world, I do contend. Eternality of the world, at least in a cyclic manner. This contention is due to the fact because God's love ad intra, that is inside the Trinity, is not a sufficient accounting of the totality of God's love. God's love ad intra is not a sufficient accounting for the totality of God's love. God must love something ad extra, that is outside the Trinity, outside of his person, in order to make love fully actualized. In order to make love fully actualized. The same is true for us as well, I do contend. Indeed, only when we love that which is outside of us do we truly actualize love in our own lives. That's a slight to Bradford and McCall there because I perpetually fall short of doing that. It's an explicit rebuke of me, in fact. In Ord's opinion, however, it is necessarily the case that God always acts intentionally in sympathetic and empathetic response to others to promote overall well-being. Loving other entities is not an arbitrary divine decision, but a central and necessary aspect of God's eternal, unchanging, inexorable nature. God cannot not love, to use the double negative. And my 5th or 6th grade English teacher is now probably going wild. She's watching. Nevertheless, it is a necessarily expressed attribute of this person. Ord is not suggesting that God has no choice whatsoever, however, with regard to love, because obviously he does. The way that he chooses to respond in a loving manner to the overtures of his subjects, in fact, is alterable. That God loves others is an aspect of God's eternal essence, and essential, therefore, to his person. However, the manner in which God chooses to promote overall well-being is essentially ad hoc. So then, how God loves is a free choice on God's part, but the compulsion to love itself is inexorable, inviolable, and alterable. Because love is the primal attribute of God's being. What Ord attributes to God generically by talking about God's love and His uncontrolling love. I would like to transfer it to the Spirit specifically. So then, the Spirit's canonically donated, self-giving, creative, and uncontrolling love for the natural world is an essential and necessary aspect of her being. Further, I claim that her self-offering, that is her canonic love, is a necessary part of what it means for God in general to empower creation and creatures. Thus, one could accurately assert that after the imbibification of the world by the Spirit of God, creation is permeated by, saturated by, and inundated with the spirit of creativity, which leads to the derivation of complexity within the natural environment. What's more, God's covenant of love with humanity is not arbitrary. It is necessary, it is inviolable, and it is irrevocable. So then, self-love, that is ad intra love, and entity love, that is ad extra love, are both essential aspects of God's eternal and necessary nature. God's love is not conditional in the sense that God may choose or may not choose to love any entity at any particular time. Rather, according to Ord, which I affirmed with them, God's love is unconditional, and that necessarily so. Conclusion. The God of canonically donated full ordered love, the decision to express love at all times comes first. This is because God's love is the first and primary attribute of His person, not power, not forgiveness, not eternality, not omniscience, not omnipotence, not omnipresence, but love. Love comes first. Love is the primary attribute through which the whole litany of terms I just mentioned are expressed. In my conception, full-ordered love is self-giving love in its entirety and a proper demonstration of it. My understanding of necessarily expressed full-ordered love also particularly highlights the dimensions of filial love. This is because filial love benefits from, now even stronger, requires relationships with other entities. Filial love requires relationships with other entities. It requires cooperation, friendship, mutuality, and in fact reciprocity. Those four things. Filial love requires reciprocity, mutuality, friendship, and what was the cooperation. Excuse me. Yes. When I go backwards, I can't do it. Excuse me. But I would like to therefore propose that Christian theologians in the 21st century focus or reorient their pursuit of a development of a theology of love more so toward filial love, because I think filial love has been neglected in the past generation or so. If anything, our current context today, defined as it is by tumults on all sides, definitely calls for more cooperation, more friendship, more mutuality, and more reciprocity. I do contend. The union of agape, eros, philia, and storge love leads to flourishing lives in the present era. Flourishing lives, I contend, consistently and necessarily express full-ordered love. Indeed, full-ordered love would repay evil with good, the way that agape does. Full-ordered love would, moreover, seek to increase and expand the value of other entities like filial love, or like eros love would do. And furthermore, full-ordered love would thirdly attempt to promote cooperation, friendship, mutuality, and reciprocity the way that filial love does. And fourthly, full-ordered love would seek to increase the familial ties that bind us together, like storge love would. Since God expects us to show necessarily self-giving, self-offering, self-donating, canonically donated love, that which I've designated canonically donated, rather, we therefore indeed have the ability to love others canonically at all times. Notice I said that flies in the face of most Pauline theology. But nevertheless, because we've been granted by the Spirit with self-offering, self-giving, self-donating love, we therefore as humans have the ability to love others as canonically donated entities at all times. That is why I began this lecture by noting that the utmost form of love is the utmost gift of self. In sum, when we act as genuine conduits and amplifiers of the Spirit's canonically donated love and self-giving love, we can truly and entirely and completely and fully and wholly and infinitely love others just as God does all the time. May we go forth then and do likewise, starting with me. Thank you.
We now have time for questions and discussion. I'd like to start on where you just left off, the question of being able to canonically, so embody canonically donating love at all times.
Yes.
When I hear that, I actually think John Wesley, Christian perfection. Is there a connection for you at all with Wesley and entire sanctification and Christian perfection when you say that?
Yes, there is, in fact, yes. I believe that those individuals who have gone on to Christian perfection can, in fact, consistently, ardently, and forevermore express love in that manner. I do. Yes, I do have a Wesleyan background, very strong one.
And that makes me wonder, would John Wesley also affirm the doctrine of love that you're describing in a sort of process model?
That's a very interesting question there. Indeed it is, sure. Honestly, I think that if John Wesley were alive today, he'd be a flaming process theologian also.
I think he already was.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
Yes, sir, Dr. Collins.
But I'm asking about a kind of a throwaway line at the beginning, but I was very interested. Did I hear you say that in the Bible the Spirit is often spoken of with feminine language?
I shouldn't have said often. It occurs from time to time, but not often.
Okay.
That was a little bit of my preacherly hyperbole there.
Well, I mean, the more it occurs, the happier I am. But
Right. No.
I think it would be way
at times, the Spirit is referenced with attributes that are feminine, and so forth.
But there's never an actual use of a feminine
I don't think there's a use of pronoun. Sure, you're
I
right.
was hoping I could.
Yeah, I misstated that. Indeed. Thank you for calling me.
No. That was not a criticism. It was just.
No, really.
It led me to think maybe that was more in support of that in the Bible. So,
No, there are attributes that are feminine attributed to the Spirit throughout. Yes. But I made a mistake there.
no, I'm not at all sure you made a mistake. It was just you aroused hope.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Maybe I can say it. So God, it's hard to believe that God loves us after tragedy, abuse, and other evil. Right? But then you made a statement that God replaces evil with love. Would you explain the differences?
Yeah, well, the first part there was actually the title of a book by Thomas J. Ord. God Can't. How to love God and how to believe in loving God after tragedy, abuse, and other evils. So I think that was the context of that. But I do contend that God, at times, I don't know if replacing would be the right word for it, but if I said that, I must have misspoke. But I don't know if replacing would be the right word. Yes, very well, yes. Repays evil with good. That's correct. Repays. That's what I'm saying. Very well. Yes. And I do contend that. Yes. Yes, Christian.
Say that God cannot control an idea that I find appealing. I wondered if you could expand a little bit on why that is.
Well, God grants autonomy, integrity, and also genuine causal efficacy to His creation. Because we were genuinely causally efficacious, we're also therefore self-determined to a great degree. In that regard, that that is also the contention of Thomas J. Ord out of his uncontrolling love of God. Insomuch as God loves us, but he loves us uncontrollingly, to conjugate that term. That being the idea that he simply pours out his love on us recklessly, and then allows us to weave our own path, if you will, to go in a serpentine manner, as I think I referred to it as. Right. Yes. Did I address your question there at all? Well, I feel like I'm making short shrift to it. I think that God, because he endows us with creativity, he endows us with our own ability for self-determination, he endows us with our own ability for causal efficacy. Therefore, he respects that and allows us to do a proverbially own thing, even if that means, I guess, going against his will, and that eventually so.
I'm interested in the question of God's freedom. So, and this is actually, I would push Tom Ward on the same thing, so I'm curious on how you'll respond to this idea. But to what extent can we say that God is truly free to choose how to love if God must act in the most loving way possible at any given moment? Doesn't that sort of determine that God's going to choose only one? You know, there aren't a whole lot of possibilities for God. There's one, and it's the most loving thing to do in any moment.
That's actually a very good critique there. It is indeed. Yes, I've not processed that to this point.
Me either. That's why I'm curious.
Right, no, honestly, that's an interesting thought experiment that God, because he always chooses the maximally loving thing to do, that he's not free. That's interesting. That's an interesting assertion.
I guess maybe there's a world in which there could be like multiple maximally good options, and that God can choose among them. But I don't know. There's something in me that wants to say, isn't one just a little bit better, and that's the reason God chose it? But it's hard to say.
No, honestly, that's a very warranted critique. Actually, it is. I don't think that I've encountered that before. So I'm sorry. It's pull a mulligan on you, but I'm going to.
Feel free to think about it in your leisure. Get back to me with an answer, and then I can seal it.
Yes, sir.
I accept everything you're saying. I don't think that's wrong, and I'm not trying to test you or throw you off. But I have a burden for atheists and the secularists, philosophers, most philosophers, they're living in a world light years beyond the theology that you're talking about. They think.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if there's a parallel here. If I could explain to my philosopher, there's a parallel between your full ordered love, if I heard you correctly, the full ordered love, and Aristotle. Aristotle's notion of causation. Not saying that there's an identity between love and causation, but Aristotle, no. It's talking about the form of causation. Material, efficiency, final form. And I'm just thinking that there might be a conceptual analogy, if not a parallel, if not identity, at least an analogy of this sort of cosmic richness that we live in. You're saying it's full ordered love. Aristotle is saying it's full
causality.
Full causality. Does that make any sense?
I have actually begun working on a paper in which I'm looking to correlate teleology, that is final causality, as it's commonly known as, with Ord's depiction of full orb. He calls it full orb love. I brought in call him full ordered, but I figured y'all would probably make that connection back there. I wasn't sure, but regardless, yes, full orb love. I'm looking to correlate that with final causality or with teleology. I'm in the process with that, sorry, so to speak. Right, and I have not come to any conclusions as of yet regarding that. I have not, but I think it to be a potent potential linkage, right?
So that's a start.
Yes. Somebody else? Yes, sir. Call.
Yeah, you are very faithful to Tom. I even learned about Tom, so and I think Tom also continues to use the word, find it confusing, and I think it's going to take a long time to persuade people when they think of divine omnipotence to also think that God can. That there's the word omnipotence has a certain history,
baggage to it.
yeah. And but do you find it valuable to continue to affirm the word omnipotence?
I do not. In fact, I don't like any of the three omnis. To tell you the truth,
Oh,
I don't like
okay.
any of
All
the
right.
three omnis.
I thought I heard you.
Right. But I made reference to it, but I don't think I affirmed it.
Yes, you were really referring to Tom rather than to your own view.
Right, yes, correct.
Okay, well,
But
then
no,
I won't ask you to defend it.
no, but just as an aside here, I don't think we can continue to employ omnipotence because omnipotence is a unilateral action. At least if you don't do verbal gymnastics, it's a unilateral action. And I don't think that God can unilaterally do anything. It always takes a concurrence of wills between God and His creation or God and His creatures in order to bring about divine action in the world today. Right. I admit that I've got the taint of David Hume in me. I've got the taint also of Charles Darwin to a great degree. So, and I admit that fully. Right. And I guess all of my answers should be predicated with that.
I don't think it has to be a taint of anybody, just to recognize that everything that happened has multiple causes. Omniscience sounds like it rejects it. I have real trouble figuring out. But anyway, I do know Tom. Tom thinks it's important to hang on to the word.
That would be one differentiation between he and I.
Well,
There's not much daylight between he and I, but that would be one area.
okay. Then I'll just have to keep arguing, asking him rather than you.
I wonder, does that mean, so if we get rid of omnipotence as a label as well as the concept, is it sufficient to say that God is the most powerful? Or should we really even just say God is differently powerful or persuasively powerful? That even the sort of greater and less distinction seems to be describing God's power of the same kind, namely unilateral or coercive. I don't know. I haven't thought about that before. But maybe.
Well, I would personally emphasize. I mean, I think that God is unique.
Fair enough.
and therefore that all the attributes that we put on him, we simply think of them as they operate among human beings. It doesn't quite get there.
Right.
But I'm also on the side of saying our human language is relevant, that we should just say this is a mystery totally different from that.
Sure.
So
Well,
I don't want to push that too hard, but nevertheless, God is not another creature.
No, the God that I serve is the chief exemplification of all the goodness of humanity.
So following up on that, God's the chief exemplification of all the goodness, and we have the capacity to love wholeheartedly. Why don't we? What's going on there?
Well, it's very interesting. I come from a Pauline background. Pauline. I go from a Pauline background, and therefore, even more so than that, I interpret Paul through the lens of Augustine, and this is my baggage because Augustine, blessed be his name, blessed be his soul, but I think he was wrong on Paul. His idea of the fall of mankind is based on an error in translating from Latin. That's where that came from. Of course, the whole three-tiered story universe, and then also the double fall being of the fall of angels, and then the fall of mankind. That's all based on an errant translation from Latin. But regardless, he promulgated the the idea. And I think to a great degree, I read Paul through the lens of Augustine today, even though I'm looking to get away from that. But, right. But to your question more precisely, excuse me, if you repeat that again.
Why is it that we don't live up to our capacity to be fully ordered love?
Well, I think that we are, in some sense. I'm hesitant to use the term fallen because of all the baggage you get with it, but I think that we do continually miss the mark. That, of course, being the origination of the term sin in the New Testament, missing the mark. It was used in an archery contest when they missed the mark of the target. And I think that we continually miss the mark of the most loving action that we can do. And if you want to attribute that to some sort of a quasi-corrupt nature, I wouldn't have an issue with that.
But it's not that maybe God just is insufficiently luring us or something.
No.
We wouldn't blame God.
No.
It's something about being human.
Yes, it's the frailties of humanity, I think, would be attributable to that. That would be attributable rather to the frailties of humanity.
I'd like to suggest that we use the term multiple causation again. In every moment, God is playing a role, is influencing us to some degree, but boy, there are a lot of other influences.
Yeah.
And that all the other influences be completely gone, and only the influence of God remain, might be an abstract possibility. I don't think it ever happens.
Yes, sir.
Well, at the same time, I think I'm sure it's the best term, disordered love.
That's what,
We surrounded by forces of love, but we disorder, we misallocate our relations to love.
that's a powerful assertion, disordered love. I think you're right, that is a good
Well, I just got it the other day from Eleanor Stuff, another philosopher. She's an expert on the question of love. Love is everywhere, but we jerk it out of order.
right.
And if we take a process view of God as sort of the cosmic orderer of things, calling the world to come a certain way, then yeah, I could see the sort of chaotic or disordered love that God is sort of calling into a full ordered love. That would be the lure.
The love
I like that.
surrounds us, but we are limited. Constantly are sucked into this and that heavy thing. That we're in charge of distorted, and we distort each other. It has a history of distorted loving.
That's a powerful assertion. Yes, sir, Archie.
I wonder if there's, just building on things we're studying recently, I wonder if there's a interreligious, transreligious kind of thing happening with how you're saying mutual causation and this idea of gnosis. I feel like this self-emptying of these other mutual, the way you said it, like the emptying of, like almost like in a Buddhist sense of emptiness, like the emptying of these other causations to kind of be filled with just this.
With God alone.
Yes. Huh. I don't know. I just thought that. These are the room to ask that question.
Yeah.
I was going to speak to that. Perhaps McCall.
I think that the Christian view is empty in, whose view emptiness.
Yeah, I have a slight problem with the emptiness idea, only because if in the Bible, of course, we encounter the idea that the demon comes back and finds the house well kept and in order, but nothing there. So the demon fills that body there. So, yeah, emptying maybe, but not emptying without being empty, maybe not the emptiness. Well, do we have anybody online that wants to ask a question?
Anybody online that would like to ask a question?
not smart enough.
All questions
Okay.
have been answered.
So, Christian, what is it?
Just one minor point of clarification about the image of spirit imbibing creation versus the image of Rebecca pouring the water out. In the image of Rebecca pouring the water out, I was thinking prop as creation,
Yes, yes.
spirit pouring into creation. But you're talking about the spirit imbibing creation, and in that I imagining the creation is like going through. So I just a little bit used in a way that was imagined.
Well, the way that I was using the term imbibe was again the Old English sense, which in the modern usage we think of imbibing alcohol. We go out and we drink alcohol. That's what we think about when we think of imbibing. But in the Old English sense, imbibe referred to a saturation or a permeation, even an inundation, and it did not refer to so much of an intake as it did to an outtake, so to speak. So I was using that in the Old English sense. Is that clear?
Yes, yeah.
All right, then. Well, thank you for your time.
Fantastic job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Teresa.
Thank you. No, you know,